Hi, and welcome back to Psychology with me, Mr. Snyder. And today we're going to start a new domain where we first talk about cognition. And to start that domain, we're going to talk about memory, and more specifically, encoding and storage. So your learning targets for the day are to talk about how memories are encoded, talk about the different levels of processing, go over strategies for improving the encoding of memory, describe working memory and long-term memory, explain how memory is stored, and learn strategies for improving the storage of memories. It sounds like a lot, but I promise you it's not. So let's go ahead and get started. First of all, if we had to define memory, we all know what memory is, but it's more difficult to put a definition to it. We'd say it's an active system that receives information from the senses, puts that information into a usable form, organizes it and stores it away, and then retrieves the information from storage. So it sounds a lot like a computer, and that's exactly how you can think of it. Memory is like a computer, which happens to have memory. There's several models that have been proposed to illustrate the working of memory, and all of them involve these same three processes. Encoding, which into a computer is like typing, storage, which is like saving a file, and then retrieval, which is like opening a file. So again, encoding is what people perform on the sensory information that comes in through sensory memory to process that information into a form that is usable into the brain's storage systems. Storage is holding on to that information for some period of time, and then retrieval is getting that information out and into a form in which it can be used. The different models, the first is the information processing model, which is probably the most popular. It assumes the processing of information for memory storage is similar to a computer, how that processes memory in a series of the three stages. Sensory, short-term, and long-term. But then we encode, we store, and we retrieve as well. The parallel distributed processing, or the PDP model, is a model of memory where the memory processes are proposed to take place at the same time over a large network of neural connections. And then the levels of processing model says that information that is more deeply processed or processed according to its meaning is remembered more efficiently and for a longer period of time. And we kind of talked about that during learning as well. So here is, you can screenshot this, but this is the three-stage memory process. You can see we encode events into our sensory memory, and then we pay attention to that. What we're paying attention to then goes into our short-term memory, and we either consolidate that somehow into our long-term memory, and then we can retrieve it. That doesn't make a lot of sense now because we haven't discussed anything about those yet. So let's go ahead and continue. The information processing model says that there are three stages or types of memory systems. There's sensory, short-term, and long-term. Sensory memory is the point where information enters the nervous system through your sensory organs. So each of your senses has a sensory memory. Two kinds that have been studied extensively are the iconic and echoic sensory memories. So iconic is your visual. And this only lasts a fraction of a second, and then your brain forgets it. Wave your hand in front of your face. You may see that there's kind of a trace behind it. And that just means that that is where your hand was, and your iconic memory is forgetting it. And it's tracking where your hand is going. In echoic memory, it's the auditory sensory memory that lasts a little bit longer, about 2 to 4 seconds. And you've probably experienced this if you're not paying attention and somebody says something to you, and then you say back to them, "What?" But then once you process that echoic memory, you go, "Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about." So you heard them, and that was stored in your echoic memory, and your brain had to process it before you could respond. And that's known as the what phenomenon. The short-term memory is where memory is held for brief periods of time while it's being used. And it's important to know that it's encoded primarily in auditory form. So you talk inside your own head, pretty much. You can hear your voice talking. Hopefully you don't hear any other voices talking. The selective attention then is the ability to focus on only one stimulus from all of the sensory input that you are receiving. And this is apparent in the cocktail party effect, where noises are happening in the background and you're coming through and your unconscious processes are trying to sort through all of that information. But if somebody says your name, the unconscious processes put that forward into your conscious thought, and you recognize your name being said. And that's been studied extensively. It's known as the cocktail party effect. The parallel distributed processing model is where the simultaneous processing of memories take place. It allows people to retrieve many different aspects of a memory all at once from different parts of the brain, and it facilitates much faster reactions and decision making. Now, how much can your short-term memory hold? George Miller was the most famous psychologist to study this, and he used something called the digit span test, which we will talk about in class. Through his research, he reported that the capacity of a short-term memory is 7 plus or minus 2. 7 chunks or pieces of information plus or minus 2. So some people could only remember 5. Some people could remember as many as 9. But 7 plus or minus 2 is the magical number for short-term memory. How do we improve your short-term memory? One simple way is chunking. It's the process of recording stuff into meaningful units. So with a phone number is really 10 digits, but if we divide it out, we get the area code, which is then put into parentheses, the 3-digit prefix, and then the 4-digit last number. And that means that now, instead of 10 numbers, I just have to remember 3 sets of more manageable units. 3 numbers, and 4 numbers. It's also why companies pay to have their phone number be a word, because then instead of remembering 4 numbers you're not familiar with, you're just remembering a word. Papa John's always tries to get their phone number to end in 7272 because that spells Papa. So you just have to remember the prefix Papa. Why do we call it short term? Most people use that incorrectly. They say, oh, it's in my short term memory, which means like anything that they learned that day. But it really only lasts about 12 to 30 seconds when you don't rehearse it. It rapidly decays or deteriorates after that. One way to keep something in your head, besides writing it down, which is not keeping it in your head, is called maintenance rehearsal. And you continue to pay attention to the information. You may rehearse it over and over. It stays in your short-term memory that way until rehearsal stops. And so working memory then is the active system that processes the information in short-term memory. It's what you're working with. And there's 3 interrelated systems in working memory. A central executive that controls the 2 other systems. There's a visual sketch pad and a kind of auditory recorder where you can play around and it records the information coming in. Once we get to long-term memory is where all the permanent information is kept, more or less permanently. The capacity of this is unlimited, and it leads to a relatively permanent physical change in the brain. Now, we're still searching for where memories are held in the brain, but I mean, it has to lead to some sort of permanent change in the brain, and it's unlimited. That whole you only use 10% of your brain, that is bullcrap. Basically, once something is in your long-term memory, you are going to have it there forever. Why we forget stuff may just be a difference of not being able to retrieve it. It's there, we just can't get to it anymore. So how is long-term memory stored? It's basically, if it's rehearsed enough, it'll be in your long-term memory. It has to be encoded in some sort of meaningful form, something that is special to you. It's a storehouse. I like to think of it as a warehouse of filing cabinets for the meanings of words, concepts, and events. One way to improve your memory, instead of maintenance rehearsal, elaborative rehearsal is basically connecting something you're trying to remember by making it meaningful or connecting it to something you already know. That's how learning theorists and education experts recommend that you learn anyway. But elaborative rehearsal is more meaningful than maintenance rehearsal. Maintenance, you're just trying to maintain it in your brain. Different types of long-term information. You have different types of memories. We have non-declarative and declarative. In class, I'll probably use the terms implicit and explicit. Implicit memories are skills that you have, and explicit memories are information that you have. So you know how to ride a bike probably, even though you haven't rehearsed that probably in a long time. If I gave a bike to you, you would probably be able to do it. And that just means that the implicit skills don't go away as a person ages. It's the explicit information and memories that we have problems retrieving. Long-term memories include the general facts and knowledge, personal facts, and these skills. Like we said, implicit memory are your memory for skills, procedures, habits, and conditioned responses. They're not conscious, but they're implied to exist because they affect your behavior. It's also called procedural memory because it does involve procedures, and it's not easily retrieved because you couldn't explain how to ride a bike to somebody, but you would be able to do it. And then the declarative memory is the types of long-term memory that is the information. And it's easily, if I asked you who the first president of the United States was, you would be able to tell me. Bring it from your long-term memory into your short-term memory and then use it and tell me. Two types. Semantic is your information, and episodic is your episodes, memories, events of your life. Semantic memory, knowledge or language, information learned in formal education, who is the first president, what's 2 + 2, stuff like that. Episodic memory are your personal information, daily activities, and events that have happened in your life. And here is a chart of long-term memory. I have another one that I'll give you in class, a better one, but basically those are your types of long-term memories. And then the long-term memory organization in the semantic network model, it basically says that in your brain, things that are more closely related will be stored closer together than concepts that are not highly related. And again, this is just a theory. It's difficult to prove. But that's all I have for your first lesson in memory. Next time we'll talk about retrieval and things like retrieval failure and forgetting and how our memories can be altered. So go ahead and fill out those learning targets, bring them back to class, and I will see you later. Bye-bye.